We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Gimel Amud Aleph Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 53a. The Mishnah continues describing the blood application process by the outer korban chatos. The Mishnah says, Ola Bakevish, that the Kohen, he ascends the ramp of the Mizbeach. This is the outer Mizbeach. Ufana l'sovev, and he turns by the sovev, by the ledge of the Mizbeach. Ubalo l'keren deromis mizrachis, and he comes to the southeastern corner. He applies the blood. Mizrachis tzifonis, then he comes to the northeastern corner, applies the blood. Tzifonis ma'aravis, then he comes to the northwestern corner and applies the blood. And ma'aravis dromis, and finally the southwestern corner and applies the blood. Sheyore hadam, the remainder of the blood, hayashofech al yesod deromis, he pours it by the base, the southern base of the Mizbeach. And the Mishnah continues, V'ne'acholin lifnim min hakloim, when it comes to these korban chatos, they are eaten within the curtains, it means to say in the azara, within the surrounding walls of the azara of the Beis HaMikdash, using the term koloim, the curtains, that's a reference to the Mishkan. It would apply by the walls of the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. L'zichrei kohuna, it's eaten by the kohanim, the males. B'chol ma'echol, can be eaten in any fashion, whether it's roasted, etc. L'yom v'layla, and it's eaten for a day and a night, ad chatzos, until midnight. And the Gemara says, hey Chiyavid, what exactly does the Kohen do when he's applying the blood to the corners of the Mizbeach? What's the procedure? The Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lazar, it's a machlokes amoraim between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lazar. Chad Omer, one says, no, sin ama elach v'ama elach, he applies the blood, an am in this direction or an am in that direction, meaning to say, he can apply the blood anywhere as long as it's within an amma of the corner of the Mizbeach. V'chad Omer, and the other one says, mechate v'yored, he sprinkles the blood and it descends, keneged chudo shel keren, corresponding to the edge of the corner of the Mizbeach. And the Gemara continues and explains, Aliba de Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon, according to Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon, the Yamar hi atzma in anasis ela begufa shel keren. He says the applications of the blood have to be to the corner itself, meaning it has to be to that 1 amma by 1 amma projection at the top corners of the Mizbeach. Exactly there is where the blood is applied. So the kuli alma lo pligi, there's no machlokas within Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon. Ki pligi aliba de Rabbi, the whole machlokas is only according to Rabbi. Rabbi holds that as long as it's the upper half of the Mizbeach that you're applying the blood, it doesn't have to be to the corners themselves. That's where we have a machlokas. Mar Savar, one says amo elach v'amo elach keneged keren, who one says as long as you're within an amma, that corresponds to the corner. Umar Savar, and the other one says keneged chuda in tfelo, it has to be along the edge. If it's not along the edge, if it's more distant than that, then it's not going to be okay. And Rashi explains, hey Chiyavid, what does he do? Matanas etzba bekeren, how does it work when he applies with his finger the blood to the corner of the Mizbeach? Amo elach, again, 1 am in each direction. Kishu omed eitzel zavas ha-Mizbeach. What that means is when he's standing by the corner of the Mizbeach, no sein besoch amma shel mikso, he just has to apply the blood within an amma of the corner. Le'eza ruach sheyirtza, whichever side he wants, he can choose a side. O ledorom, o lemizrach, it could be, let's say, the south or the east. Bekeren dromis mizrachis, when he's by the southeastern corner, as long as he applies it within an amma of the corner, it could be on the southern wall or on the eastern wall. V'chein b'chol keren, and this is true with every single corner. Mechate v'yored, and then the other opinion is he sprinkles the blood and it descends. Lashon hakosav, Rashi notes that the Gemara here is using the language of the pasuk. Hakoin hamechate osa, it says hakoin hamechate osa, that refers to the sprinkling or the applying of the blood. And Rashi continues, Aliba de Rebbe Lazar, according to Rebbe Lazar, Lakamon Maisi Plugsayu, this Machlokas Tanoim is going to be brought later on. So according to Rebbe Lazar, who says, Hi Atzma, Kilomar, what it means to say is, Kol Atzma V'ikr Mitzvahs, it means the main mitzvah, Eino El Hasham, is really only on the corner itself. That's the very upper part of the Mizbeach, the protruding 1 by 1 am at each corner. So according to that, to Kuli Amalo Pligi, there actually is no Machlokas Amoraim within that opinion. Why? Because the Lo Ba'in on Chuda, everybody agrees it doesn't need to be at the edge itself. The Keren Ksiv, because it says Keren, it talks about the corners or the horns of the Mizbeach. The Amma al Amma Barum Amma, and that Amma by Amma at the height of an Amma, that's what those Keren, that's what those corners, that's what those horns are. Hanos and Barosh HaMizbeach, that are placed at the top of the Mizbeach. B'chol Zavis v'Zavs at each corner. B'chol Mokum Shabbat, as long as you apply it anywhere on that horn, on that corner, Kari Keren, that is called Keren. Everybody would agree within that opinion. Ki pligi aliba de Rebbe, the only machlokas is within Rebbe. The machshela michut hasikra lamala, he says that from the chut hasikra, which is that dividing line of the Mizbeach, dividing the upper part of the Mizbeach from the lower parts, he just says it has to be at the upper parts. The afagav de lo bekeren, even though it's not being applied directly to the horn, to the corner of the Mizbeach. So there we have a machlokas. Mar Savar, one holds, ki hechi de Keren have amma al amma, just like like the keren itself is an amma by an amma, so av kol shetachtav kenegdo have a keren, so too all that space corresponding underneath is considered the keren as well. You have that latitude of an amma. Umar Savar, but the other one holds kevan dekra lav akarnos mamish kapit. If the pasuk is not saying it has to be the horns themselves, b'shara mizbeach lo shayach loshen keren. So by the rest of the mizbeach, we wouldn't call it a keren ela bechuda shel zavis, unless it's applied at the exact edge of the corner. And the Gemara continues, Meisvei, we have a question from the following Brisa, Chatos hatzibor v'hayochid, by the communal and the individual carbon chatos, Keitzad matan daman, how does it work when applying their blood? Hayaola lakevesh, he goes up the ramp, ufana lasovev, and he turns by the ledge, uvalo lekeren dromis mizrachis, he comes to the southeastern corner, v'tovel be'etzbo ha'yimonis ha'miyumenis shebiyomin, and then he dips with his finger of the right hand, and he uses the index finger of the right hand, that's the miyumenes shebiyomin, that's that particular finger, min hadam shebemizrak, from the blood in the bowl, in the basin, v'chomer begodlo milmalu ve'etzbo hakatana milmata, that means to say that he uses his thumb and he uses etzbo hakatana as his pinky in order to guide that blood to the tip of the index finger, umechate v'yored, and he applies the blood and it descends, keneged chuda shel keren, along the edge of the corner, ad shemechala kol hadam shebe'etzbo, until he finishes all the blood that's on the finger, v'chein kol keren v'keren, and that's what he does by every single corner. And so here from this brisa, it seems to be it has to be the edge itself. You don't have that amma of latitude. And the Gemara continues and answers, Hachi Kamar, this is actually what the brisa is saying, mitzvah bechuda, that lechatzchila, the mitzvah is to do the edge, iyavet amma elach, v'amma elach, but if he does it an amma this way, an amma that way, less lanba, that is not a problem, that is perfectly acceptable. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, my Rebbe, my Rebbe Elazar, Rebbe Shimon. What is this machlokus between Rebbe and Rebbe Elazar, Rebbe Shimon? And the Gemara says, Detanya, as we learned in the following brisa, domim ho'elyonim, when it comes to the blood that's applied to the upper part of the mizbeach, nitonin michut hasikru lamala, that blood is applied to the mizbeach above the chut hasikra. The chut hasikra was a red line that went around the mizbeach, the midpoint of the mizbeach, and so it has to be above that line. And domim hatachtonim, the blood that's applied on the lower part of the mizbeach, nitonin michut hasikru lamata, and that blood is applied below the chut hasikra, again the lower half of the mizbeach. Divrei Rebbe, these are the words of Rebbe. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon says, Ba'med davar mamurim, when is this true? Ba'ola sa'of, that's by a bird carbon ola. Avol bechatos behema, when it comes to a chatos behema, he atzma a nasis ella al gufa shel keren. There the application of the blood has to be on the horns themselves, meaning to say the very top of the mizbeach. There were corners, there were horns on the top of the mizbeach, one amma by one amma, as we said, and Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon says the blood has to be applied there by chatas behema. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Avo says, my time of the Rebbe, what's the reason of Rebbe? Why does he say that it doesn't have to be applied to the keren itself? T'chsiv, because it's written in the pasuk, v'haharel arba amos u'meharel ulamala. The haharel is referring to the mizbeach. It says it's 4 amos. And the Gemara continues and says, Arba amos hu dehave, is the mizbeach 4 amos. There's no point in the mizbeach that's 4 amos. And so the Gemara continues and explains, Amar Ravada Barava says, Umakom Koronos Arba, what it means is the area of the corners of those horns, those are 4 amos. Each one again is 1 amma by 1 amma, and that's the explanation of this pasuk in Yechezkel. But the Gemara says, Makom Koronos Dalet Have, but is that even really true? The area of the horns, the area of those corners is 4. It's not true. If you put them all together, you're really going to have an area of 2 amos by 2 amos. And so therefore the Gemara says, Ela Ema Rishus Kronos Dalet. What it really means is that the Rishus, what's considered the domain of the Kronos, the domain of those horns is 4 amos, meaning one can apply the blood even below the Kronos, within those 4 amos that are above the Chut HaSikra. That is the source for Rebbe's halacha. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Tanan Hasam, we learned in a Mishnah over there. This is a Mishnah in Meseches Midos. It says Chut Shel Sikra. Again, that's the red line at the midpoint of the Mizbeach. Chogro Ba'emsa, that goes around the Mizbeach in the middle. Lahavdil, to separate. Bein Domim Ho'elyonim Ladamim HaTachtonim, between the upper bloods and the lower bloods. Again, sometimes the blood is applied on the upper half, sometimes on the lower half of the Mizbeach. And the Gemara says, Menahani Mili, from where do we know this? Amar Rav Achabar Rav Katina, Rav Achabar Rav Katina says, Shenemar, as it says in the pasuk, V'Haisa Hareshes Ad Chatzi HaMizbeach, the net is until the Chatzi HaMizbeach, the midpoint of the Mizbeach, and that's the idea. HaTorah nit nosna mechitza lahavdil bein domim ho'elyonim ledomim hatachtonim. The Torah gives a mechitza, gives a separation to separate between the upper bloods and the lower bloods. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Shiyore Hadam, the remnant of the blood is poured to the base of the Mizbeach, specifically the southern base of the Mizbeach. And the Gemara says, Tanu Rabban, and the rabbis taught, Al Yisod Mizbach Ze Yisod Deromi. This refers to the southern base. Ata Omer Ze Yisod Deromi. Oeno Ali Yisod Ma'aravi. You're saying it's the southern base, maybe it's the western base. V'yilmod Sasam and Amaforish. In that case, we should learn what is closed, what is not explained, from what is explained, meaning to say, by the inner carbon chatos, there we know that the Kohen leaves the Beis HaMikdash, and the first area of the Mizbeach he encounters is the west side, and that's why the remnant is poured at the west base of the Mizbeach. So maybe over here also, we should say that it's the west base of the Mizbeach. And the Brisa says, Amrit, we say, Yilmid Yiridasum and Hakevesh Liyitziyasum and HaHechel. We learn the descending from the ramp, from the exiting from the Hechel. Ma Yitziyasum and HaHechel, just like when he exits the Hechel, so then Besamachlo, then he pours the remnant blood nearby, meaning by the western base of the Mizbeach, which corresponds to the area where he exits. Af Yiridasum and Hakevesh Besamachlo, so too when he goes down the ramp, which is the southern side, so he's going to pour the remnant blood on the southern base of the Mizbeach. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Tanya, we learned in a Brisa, Rabbi Yishmael Omer, Rabbi Yishmael says, Zeh v'zeh Yisod Ma'aravi, that by both, whether we're talking about the inner carbon chatos or the outer, it's always going to be poured by the western base of the Mizbeach. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai says, Zeh v'zeh Yisod Deromi. In both cases, it's the Yisod Deromi, it's actually the southern base. And the Gemara says, B'shalom l'man damar Yisod Ma'aravi. I understand, according to the one who says it's always the western base. So Kasavar Yilmid Sasam and Amaforish. So he holds that we learn what is not explained from what is explained. So since we know by the inner chatos, it's going to be the closest to where he's exiting the Heichel. It's going to be the western base. So the same is going to be true by the outer karbanos. El l'man damar Yisod Deromi. But according to the one who says that it is the southern base in both situations, so my time, what's the reason? And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Asi says, some have the gears of Amar Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi says, Kasavar Haitana, this Tana holds, Kula Mizbeach, but Safon Kai, that the Mizbeach is entirely in the north, so when someone exits the Heichel, he actually is encountering the southern base right away. Lishnachrin, another version of the same idea, Kula Pesach Bidarim Kai, the entire entrance to the Heichel corresponds to the southern end of the Mizbeach. Same basic idea, when you exit the Heichel, you encounter the southern base of the Mizbeach, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Gimel Amud Beis.